I'd been signed off solo, so I'd been doing that for multiple days out in Florida. I think about 8 days in total flying as a solo pilot. And then on this one particular day, it was the 19th of August 2007 specifically, so I had an engine fire that I was alerted to in the visual sense. So I'm there in the two-seater cockpit on my own at altitude, and it was a single engine piston light aircraft. So I looked through the forward canopy, the windshield, and I looked also through the side door canopy as well, through the window there, left and right. And on my left side, my attention was brought to a thin streak of yellow, sort of visible yellow-orange flame, and I had to look again at that, at what I was seeing. And then no sooner as I saw it, and I'm also piloting the aircraft at the time, so I'm on a downwind stretch of the pattern that I'm in that local Florida airspace, and then I go crosswind, left turn, and then left banking now into wind again, final turn into wind. This is what they call final approach. And it was at that point where the fire that I'd seen externally, this little thin streak of flame that I mentioned externally, now breached the cockpit internally. The fire started to build in the lower confines of the two-seater cockpit, and I'm still at significant altitude. So I'm still at 1,000 feet plus indicated on altimeter within that local airspace. So I had a pretty stout boots on at the time, boots and socks, but I'd made the distinct error of wearing only shorts to the knee, like these men's cargo style pants, and only a thin cotton t-shirt and a pair of like Oakley sunglasses sort of wrap around, which I guess is significant because of the scarring. So I'm looking at that runway in the distance. The fire is building. My altimeter is dropping. So I'm watching that the needle sort of revert back down from 1,900, 800. Fire is building, and I got to approximately half the height. And initially there was some fluster and panic going on in my mind, and I'm having to get a grip of the situation. I'm thinking about everything that's happening and what's going down. And then approximately 500 feet, so I'm about half the descent, half the drop. The fire was literally within the chamber of the cockpit. It's kind of up to my sort of belly, sort of stomach height within the chamber of that two-seater cockpit. And at that point, I thought to myself, I don't think I'm necessarily going to make it. I suddenly came up with a plan, if you will, a solution to try to do something alternative. So I veered away, just gently on my approach, just a few degrees to my left over sort of a stretch of grass. Also at quite a low level, so under 200 feet above the ground. I was now purely judging it by eye, and I removed my headset. I threw that in the opposite footwell because the comms at that stage was frankly futile, and I'd also performed the emergency shutdown of the controls, instrumentation, radio, etc. Unbuckled my three-point harness that runs around the waist and over the shoulders, and then I'd also had to go for the left-hand canopy door, and I'd tried to open it initially, and it wouldn't open. So this design was to the vertical position, and it would not open. So I then had to sort of elbow it with the back of my left arm, and also punch it with the palm of my hand. And then fortunately, because of the wind resistance externally holding the door down, the force that I used was able to flip the door to the vertical position, which was great. So potentially I had an exit. In reality, the problem was the instant influx of external wind was a real problem, because suddenly the fire inside the cockpit was like blazing, and the flame was lapping my face, my neck, and I'm having to sort of hold my position momentarily until the height above the deck was absolutely sort of optimal for me. And I'm judging it, as I mentioned, by eye, and I'm like literally 50 feet, 40 feet, 30 feet, and about 20 feet, I just thought, this is me, this is my one and only shot. And I'm left hand on the control stick, right hand on the throttle, hyperventilating through the corner of my mouth to protect my airway from the flame ingress, breathing it in, and also one eye shut in a bid to protect the eyesight, keeping the dominant eye open. So in the last moments, I'm judging it, and about 20 feet above the deck, I managed to clamber onto the seat, onto the left wing, and I just went for it. So I took a balance momentarily on the wing, and then just feet and knees together as I leapt and did what they call a sort of a giant stride off the back of the left wing. Snapped my feet and knees together in the air, hands above my head in a sort of prayer position, which is what I can only describe as a British Army sort of parachute exit position, something that I'd been trained in many, many times over. The impetus, if you like, the reaction to do that and perform that kind of jump and that position was born from the kind of military training, but albeit you never think you're going to have to use it in reality. But the motivation was the fact that I was on fire within the cockpit and I'm looking for an exit to get the hell out of there as quick as I could. So I got away with it, but I got away with it only by the skin of my teeth. So in reality, she was still dropping out, the aircraft that is. And when I left the back of the left wing that I mentioned, I estimate that the aircraft still dropping, that I was probably 15 feet when I physically left the back of the wing, and I'm gliding in at approximately 30 knots. So stall was imminent. I'd say I got away with it by skin of teeth, by the the stretch of my skin and bacon, as it were. I landed feet first in the long grass, relatively soft ground because of some recent torrential storm front and rainfall that had swept through Florida that afternoon, which is not uncommon. So I knew the ground would be somewhat soft when I made the landing, but I thrust forward in the impact of hitting the ground. So feet first, feet and knees together. Long bones, good, but in the thrust forwards, I inadvertently face planted the ground. I had a bilateral nasal fracture. So both sides of the nose were fractured here. Supraorbital eye socket fractures above both eyes. I inadvertently ruptured my large intestine, internally the colon. I lacerated my liver on the left-hand flank, which I later found out through the medical records. 2 ribs were also fractured, and a clavicle, the in here in the collarbone. My left index finger, as you can see there on the camera, hyperextended and fractured on contact with the ground. And then I tore also with the sharp grass and everything that I impacted in the tropical Florida area. I ruptured, or rather tore, through the right side of my nose, through the what they call the crease of your nose where it meets the face, the alar, through the lip, that completely ripped open. So multiple fractures, internal injuries. But for the record, I was 63% third and fourth degree burn. And the fourth degree burn aspect means that it's down to the bone. So where I mentioned that the fire breached the cockpit initially, in the higher altitude region, approximately 1,000 feet, that's where my lower limbs and my shin area specifically was burning for the longer period of time. So that was a nightmare for me, because it literally had burned through to the bone, and surgeons were forced to do some pretty drastic surgery on that part of the lower limbs. The flame was burning me, but it wasn't really getting a chance to settle. Was not really feeling the pain, even though I was aware of the heat. And also, I would suggest there was a lot of adrenaline going on because of the situation and because of what I'm trying to process and deal with, and the kind of decisions that were going on in my mind. So I am very much acutely aware of the heat and the inferno, and obviously the flame that I can see building up. But very luckily, I wasn't feeling it in the cockpit. In truth, the first time that the pain hit me, and it was like what I describe as a tsunami of pain. So I jumped. I'd initially thrust forward, smash that I mentioned, and then I had kind of momentarily gathered my sort of senses and composure. I'd rolled around in the long grass, sort of back and forward, to smother the flame. My shoulder was still on fire and burning. My scalp was still on fire, so I pat the shoulder, pat the scalp, extinguish the flame. My instinct was to then remember the danger of the aircraft. So I quickly got myself into position. I turned to where the aircraft was headed, and I was in a sort of a fetal position on my left side. I looked through my hands, and I actually caught a glimpse of the aircraft still airborne. She was only about 6 feet above the deck, and the propeller was there, the height of a man, roughly 6 feet, and she was still airborne. And then I physically watched the aircraft sort of gradually hit the ground. It only took, obviously, a couple of seconds for that to happen. And there was a very distinct, almighty crashing noise. And then 8 to 10 seconds later, thereabouts, there was a pause and then an almighty explosion. And that was really, really significant. So I was outside of the fire radius of that explosion, but not the shockwave. The shockwave came through me and then back again. And I remember for a few seconds, I'm fighting for breath because obviously I'm still in recovery, still trying to recover from everything that had just happened and the jump and the exit and extinguishing the flame, rolling around, getting into position. So when I'd sort of seen and witnessed and heard that almighty bang, and it was huge. I mean, you would have probably heard that from 10 kilometers away. I then turned, and my goal was to try and crawl away from position. It was just an instinct. It was just a reaction because the heat was so indescribable that I tried to crawl away. I managed to get probably another 15, 20 feet max, so further distance from the aircraft. The aircraft was probably 70 feet away initially, and now I'm probably 90 feet away, absolute maximum. And at that stage, I was completely exhausted. I had to stop with the crawl through the grass because my elbows were completely lacerated, my knees in the long Florida sharp grass. My face was all getting torn up, crawling through the grass as well, because it was long grass like so. And at that stage, exhaustion stopped me. I managed to get onto my knees and survey the wreckage. So hands above my head like this, kind of looking back, but looking at the burning wreckage of the light aircraft in the distance. The explosion had simmered down, but the heat and the fire was still incredible. And it was that moment when the pain washed over me. So it was I would probably assume that the adrenaline just dropped off. And the pain hit me like a giant tsunami, washed over me. And it felt like every single nerve sort of ending and nerve fiber within my body was that someone put a blowtorch to me all over again. And I honestly didn't think I was going to be able to hold on. That's the truth. So my reaction then, I just took my shoes and socks off. I tucked my shoes, my socks and my laces inside my shoes, my boots. I placed it neatly to the right-hand side of me because I probably figured that, it's the last vestige of control that I had. I placed it down. I leaned back with my hands across my chest in a sort of a prayer position, if you will. And I just waited. And I'm listening out. And the sirens grew louder in the near distance. And then I realized they must be coming from me because, in all sincerity, there was, like a major emergency medical response on the ground. There was 2 911 squad cars. There were a fire engine at the scene. There was an ambulance that arrived, and they must have hit me with the morphine, the paramedic, because life felt instantaneously better when I received that. But I also knew in my mind, in my subconscious, that it was really bad. That what had just happened was, my life, in all sincerity, was probably never going to be the same again. So I held on, and I just held on with everything that I had. They moved me with an ambulance over the rough ground onto some smooth, hard standing. And then the ambulance stopped. They pulled me out the back. They stretchered me across that piece of tarmac into the side doors of a waiting helicopter. The helicopter flew me some distance to Orlando Regional Health Center, as I later found out. So that's when the doctors received me, and they asked me a lot of questions, actually, and I got quite... I was initially receptive, but then I remember getting quite angry at the doctors and saying, look, just... for fuck's sake, just put me out of my misery because I don't want this life, and given what I've just come through. And as far as I was concerned, I was burned from head to toe, and I'm now blind from the reaction to the fire, the burns to both cornea of both eyes. So I'm blind from that, and I was acutely aware that I was burned, more or less from head to toe. Surgeons in America had only given me a 5% probability of survival. Honestly, how I came through that, I'll never know. You have to be hungry. You have to want to survive. You have to want to come through that. Believe me, and I did consider it in the early stages, there was times when I definitely could have thrown the towel in and given up on my whole journey. And even though I wanted to, there was something driving me. And I can't really put my finger on that. It's just a case of sometimes, you have to fight, and whether you like it or not, you have to fight if you want to have a, cliche as it sounds, but a fighting chance of coming through a process. And that's unfortunately what my journey was in the younger years, and unfortunately I'm still able to kind of share a little bit about that.